introduce Christina Brunk, who is a photographer featured in the main gallery here. Her solemn and quiet work features a sense of almost loneliness in these empty streets of Scotland, but with these beautiful, bright, vibrant pops of color. I'm very excited for her to share the story of this exhibition. So let's welcome Christina Brunk.
Thank you. So I'm not as fortunate as Becky. She managed to find her path when it was denied her in classes, and I do not have the talent of teaching myself anything. So I spent a lot of money on an art degree, which is entirely unreasonable when you don't have any business experience. Just for the younger people that need advice in the future, make sure they get some business classes under their belt. But the thing that I really enjoyed about school was the experience in criticism, like you were speaking of. I think that criticism is wonderful in some instances to challenge yourself, but in others to just really kind of like stick your foot in the ground and say, you know what, no, this is exactly why I want this and this is why. So you seem to have found that on your own, so I'm very impressed by that because it took me a while to develop the skin necessary to kind of stand up for what I wanted and what I felt about my own work. So I really admire all of the things that you've accomplished in the short 12 years that you've been exploring. So I got an art degree with an emphasis in photography from San Jose State back in 2010. I graduated. I come from a bit of a troubled background. I'm the eldest of 4 children, and we had a difficult upbringing. My father was an alcoholic and a drug user, and so there was a lot of responsibility, particularly on my shoulders as the oldest child. And a little bit of a primer is necessary to kind of explain what it is that you're seeing today. So because of the heartbreak that kind of had happened in our childhoods, me and my siblings kind of scattered to the wind. I ended up moving from Southern California to Northern California, not that too far away, but my sister, who's 2 years younger than me, went to Scotland. My brother joined the Navy, and my baby sister joined the Army. My youngest sister, Sarah, has probably the one of us that received the most difficult time. She had problems as an adult. Things would happen to her in relationships that were completely unfair. And she dealt with that for quite a long time, but was able to give birth to a beautiful son and was putting her health first when 2020 and the lockdowns happened. Sarah was being seen by the VA hospital, and because of where she lived and because there were no COVID restrictions really in place, the hospital where she was having her mental health appointments was overwhelmed with COVID visitors. And it was unfortunate because she was not able to receive her medication. She had just gone on a new medication just prior to the lockdown, and once everyone started getting sick and those side effects were pretty detrimental to her health, she wasn't able to get in with her psychiatrist to make a change. Unfortunately, Sarah fought very hard, but she did not survive. She took her life in July of 2020. I know that I'm not alone in having experienced loss during that period of time, and so it's probably pretty common for people to understand what it's like to grieve in a time where you're expected to be isolated. My sister in Scotland, we had to call her mother-in-law, ask her to be with my sister-in-law, wait till she arrived so we could call and break the news of Sarah's passing. She hadn't seen Sarah for 13 years because she was not very well off, but she needed a new start, and so Scotland felt the right move for her, but she hadn't been able to come home. So it was a very difficult time for her especially, because she wasn't allowed to even leave her door because of the restrictions that she was under. And she wasn't able to embrace anyone outside of the walls of her own home. So when the opportunity later the next year came that we could travel internationally, we decided to take that opportunity. My mother had originally planned on going, but my brother had made arrangements to be able to go, and she came into my room and said, "You need to go with your brother and be with your sister." So she paid for a ticket for me to go to Scotland for the first time in my life. So when people walk into this room, I expect that they will see kind of a travel log. But for me, I carried some of my sister's ashes to deliver to our other sister that I hadn't seen in over a decade. While we were there, we went under all the testing necessary to travel and to stay in country, which meant that we weren't able to travel anywhere outside of just casual walks and little picnics and things like that. The town where my sister lived was located in Invergordon, which is very near Inverness. I'm sure some of you have heard of Inverness, which is a very large city. And their little town relied quite a lot on tourism. They had a little port, and the cruise ships would dock there. And so when people were making their way to go explore the city, they would enjoy that little town, that little area, and they were able to make quite a lot of people very comfortable in that area. When COVID hit, that all went away. So you'll notice that in all of this photography, with save one person, everything is empty. And that is because it was. There was no one edited out of any of these photographs. There just wasn't anyone out and about. It was difficult grieving again, but because there was no ritual associated with her passing, there was not a normal funeral, there was no wake, there was no gathering of family and friends, there was no ability to go to even grief counseling at that point. So there wasn't any of those normal and comforting traditions to kind of fall back on. So it was like an open wound. But because of that, when we got to our sister in Scotland, we were able finally just to grieve together and just experience what it was to miss her so profoundly. So, like any trip, I think that any of us go to a new place, we look around and we see beautiful things and we take photographs. And I was like no other person, wasn't expecting anything to come of it. Just taking photos of things that I found beautiful, which is really not hard to do when you're in a place that was such an ancient history with such beautiful things to see. But in my case, once I got the photography back and started looking through it after uploading it at home and noticing what I was taking pictures of, it was just this very lonely feeling that had kind of come through in all the pictures. And even the way that I had edited them, I didn't want to rob it of that feeling. Like all of those dramatic clouds, it had been raining while we were there, and it just seemed to suit things so well. So that was the reason for the trip. It's not a trip that I had expected to make, but it was terribly needed. And it was the first time I've experienced being so unintentional. That I didn't go out expecting for this to mean anything outside of just, okay, I'm going to show mom these pictures when I get back of where my sister's living now. Usually in photography, because I went to school, there's a lot of intention that is practiced. When I pick up my camera, I'm looking to do something and to see something that other people don't see, to share it with them, or to create something and then capture it so that I can share that experience. And this experience wasn't anything like that. It's the first time that I had a project come together purely based on just the coincidence and the emotions and the world at that moment in time. So I am sure that all of you remember very keenly the isolation that we all felt being in our homes and unable to go anywhere. And so I was, even a year later, this was September 2021 when we took this trip, it was still very much that way in the UK. People were not out and about, people were not back to normal lives. And so it was kind of very strange to go to a place and experience such quiet in areas that clearly are very well loved, or very popular, very well kept, and to find them just empty and alone. And so the only person featured in the photographs is actually a photograph of my niece from the back after we took a picnic. And it's amazing because she really does resemble our sister Sarah in quite a lot of ways. She has the same hair color, the same stature, the same need to be noticed and loved in her own quiet way. And it felt very fitting. So basically, what you see is a few night walks, a few day trips to a nearby national park that we were able to go up and see all the beautiful hills and experience the coos. They're not cows, they're coos. Which was very kind. The little one came up and wanted the tall grass, so I was able to kind of scratch him between the eyes and experience just a calm, sweet moment with a big, giant beastie. And just really kind of reformulate what it was to be in relationship with my siblings now that my sister had gone. Sarah was 28 years old when she passed away. She had a 5-year-old son who was going to be starting kindergarten in the fall. And I miss her. I feel terrible that what happened to our family, that I couldn't protect her, and that somehow my mom, who would have dropped anything, anytime, and has always done so when my sister really needed her, felt like she couldn't go because of COVID and couldn't jump in and rescue her. And that's when we lost her. We don't blame anybody. And we understand that people make choices. But it was difficult to know that she could have had help. And she tried very hard. So I understand that when people walk in the room, they might see beautiful pictures, but to me, they're very deeply meaningful. And I hope that at least that some of that feeling of serenity and peace, my sister Melissa would tell me anytime she saw the feathers that she felt like Sarah was near, that it was angel wings, and that it was showing she was near. So that's for Melissa. So in all these little vignettes, I hope that you at least get that sense that I felt while I was there. And it appears like I only do really depressing shows, so I'm sorry. I actually was in the feature gallery when things shut down. I had another show that we had just had the opening, probably it was a week or two prior. But then COVID shut everything down. So, and again, it was a heavier show. It was in the room where people could okay, I need to walk away. But I really find the process of photography to be deeply meaningful and healing. I know that you sharing your work is beautiful to me because you've put work in places where people are able to view it and to heal, in places like the rescue mission and in the children's hospital, and how powerful it is for people to see art and to experience different places and different feelings and different colors and different perspectives. But for me, I don't know if anyone will ever enjoy the benefits of the work more than me, because of all of the things that photography allows me to say. It's kind of taboo to bring up your sister who's been gone, but I can feel her in this room. And that's really important to me. So I just wanted to thank you for participating and watching, and thank you for helping me to remember her, and hope that you find some sort of connection with something in this room, because it just reminds me a lot of very important, very singular time that I had in my life. I'd love to answer any questions if you have any. I promise I'm not, I can be nice and smiley, I promise. I'm gonna sit now. Yes.
Do you feel this exhibition is different than your main body of work?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a commercial photographer. I spend my time taking pictures of people during really great moments in their life, and I get to play the clown and be goofy and make strange goat noises and make children laugh. And it is just amazing and wonderful. I've always enjoyed interacting with people. This is entirely separate of that, because it was just so quiet and lonely. So it was completely the opposite of most of the experiences I've had with photography.
Was it hard stepping out of your comfort zone?
Yes, yes. I'm not good with landscapes. I'm not good with with photos of still life and things like that. I never was able to connect on a deep level with material around that. For whatever reason, portraits were always more evocative, the relationship between the photographer and the subject. And so that's my comfort zone. That's where I feel the most confident. So this is very outside of my wheelhouse. And so the fact that it's up at all is very strange to me. I really appreciate the opportunity to try it out and see how that works.
Last question. Do you have any tips for anyone who's interested in trying to leave their comfort zone and explore different areas that are outside their regular body or regular processes?
I think that when encountering something new, it's the curiosity that really can drive you. I feel like if you don't have that innate curiosity, that you really don't have any hope of really getting any farther into it. So if you can tap into that part of yourself that still wants to understand, that still wants to learn and to connect, I think that you feed that, and then it finds a place. And it does tend to happen a little bit fortuitously, I think. You would end up finding someone who happens to know about something, or finding a class, or maybe even all of my experiences with photography were by accident. I was going to be a graphic design major, and I was going to sit in an office and, do that stuff. But then I got a black and white class in a dark room with all the chemicals and the sound of the water and the peace that was there, and fell in love with it. And it took me completely off track. I thought I would be working with clients, and instead I'm working with other clients, trying to capture who they are, who their essences are. So I think maybe just allowing yourself to be open and allowing yourself to be curious is really the key. And then I can understand not having any free time. It's difficult when you're in the midst of different roles that you play, and I know that people like to tout self-care as being like buying this beauty product and taking this like girls trip. But sometimes self-care looks like being able to delve into something that you really want to know more about, and you're curious about, and connecting with people who know more than you do. And so maybe kind of taking a little bit of that time that you have spent in the bubble bath and putting it maybe into a relationship or into materials that interest you, that you just want to understand more. And usually, in my experience, especially with a son that does nothing but ask questions, you get more questions as you get more answers. And so the curiosity seems to be most important. Anyone else? Yes.
So you spoke that you didn't have the chance to mourn traditionally. And I can't help but wonder, creating this exhibition and actually having the bravery to show it to the public and just create this wonderful space that people can enjoy, is that I won't say capstone, but that part of, giving yourself and your family that space that was not allotted during the traditional time frame that those people.
Well, I think that in normal times, when you experience loss, you're surrounded by community, friends, and family, that you have this not necessarily public experience, but a shared experience between many, many people that have a connection some way, somehow. And the stories that get shared and the way that you are able to re-experience that person through someone else's eyes. And we weren't able to have that. We had a very small ceremony in our hometown where me, my mother, and my brother were the only blood relatives beside her son to attend. And I think that that part of sharing is included in this space now. And it's not as though like it's out on a billboard. It's in this space where people get to come up and experience the images and the artwork. And I get to share the feelings I had in remembering her. It may not be directly about her, that people may not walk up to one of these images and see Sarah, but to feel like her story is kind of being told here is really important to me. So yeah.
Any more questions for Christina? So when you were going through the photography, your photos, when did you know that you wanted to share this? Was it immediate or was it?
I think when I started working on the night photography specifically, my brother and sister thought I was nuts. We had just had this big downpour. It was 10 o'clock at night. And I was like, I'm going on a walk with my camera. I just need to get some space. I needed to kind of decompress because we had spent the whole day just like crying and holding each other. And it just was a lot after having so little time to do that. So I took a walk and they're like, what is 10 o'clock at night? It's dark out and it's gonna rain again. And what if someone mugs you? And I'm like, there's no one here. What's the very worst that can happen? I step in a puddle and I go home and I change my clothes. So it was just a walk alone in this little high street and beautiful puddles everywhere. So we had these reflections. And some of the things were a little bit more obvious, like we have photographs of buildings reflected, and they had this beautiful mural of the bagpipes and the drums. And you had that bit of like culture going on every evening around sunset in New York while they were banging pots and pans. Well, Scotland had conspired to have a playlist of certain songs that they would all get their bagpipes out throughout the city and play together in this haunting kind of melody in this very strange empty place, but you have this surround of these beautiful but somber and almost mournful songs. But anyway, so there were obvious things to take pictures of that kind of like, okay, this is what it feels like to be on the high street. But then we would find a feather, or I would find a feather, or I would notice the way that the raindrops had gathered, or the light playing on a puddle. That's just a street light that had kind of refracted and reminded me of a wisp, that wandering soul. And I think that was probably the most connected. And then when I saw the images, I realized what was happening. What I was really experiencing on that walk was, and the images that were coming out of that experience. And the way that I was alone in that moment, and I kept her with me because I couldn't help but notice things that seemed to connect me to her. So, thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you. Okay. You said you took a class and you were in the dark room. Mm-hmm. What if you never had that experience? Because that doesn't happen anymore.
Oh gosh. I mourn quite a lot for people that don't get to experience that moment, because as someone, if you see me in other settings, they call me short and spazzy for a reason. My attention span is like this big. And so it forced me to slow down because you cannot rush the process. You can't tell the chemicals to work faster. You have to expose the light for a certain amount of time. The lighting has to be low and the water has to be running. So you're in an environment where you're forced to slow down and experience the sounds around you and have that dim light. And it forced me to just have time to be calm and still. I don't know that we found a good way to replicate that, because I was there when both were happening. They had the dark room still available. I got to use like the large format where you go under the cloth and do the big old negatives and everything like that. I got to experience a lot of wonderful things, but those programs are being pulled out left and right. And as much as we love digital photography because you could take a million photographs, it's just go, 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 and it's nothing off your back, there's something lost about the happy accident, I believe, and the intention with how precious 12 or 24 shots on a roll of film can be, and how intentional you have to be about, this is the picture I want to take. I'm waiting to see what comes of it. That whole process of having to develop it and see a print and be like, why didn't that turn out? And having to print it again and again and again. But I think that we can, in a way, give ourselves that option while we're reviewing our photographs. And not a lot of people do that anymore. They'll take a picture on their phone and then you're like, oh, I'll come back to it. You never go back to it. Like, it's in your reels somewhere, in your album somewhere. But if you actually take the time to look through and notice the threads of what connects what you see, I think that you can refine that and you can see more of like, why am I taking pictures this way? What is it that I see that is important to me? One of my professors shared this really beautiful quote that stuck with me. And I'm not sure if it's his or if it's something that he found elsewhere, but when you point your camera in a direction, you're telling the world what's important to you. Because you could literally, at any point in time, at any millisecond, take a picture in any direction. But you're directing in that moment. You're trying to draw attention to something that's important to you. And so I think there's a lot of power in that. Maybe we're not as observant in the moment because it's so easy, we take it for granted. But if we allow ourselves to kind of step back and away and just see the through line from what we're actually capturing, what's important to us, that we can kind of grab hold of that and try to put that in more of our lives. And I think that you could do that in many other aspects of your life. We get busy with things, and sometimes we don't see the bigger picture of what our lives are becoming and hold on to those things that we actually care about and are precious. So.
And also, once you've had your concentration on that, I never did darker stuff.
I have the stuff if you ever want to try it.
I'm good.
It's
that if you turn around, take a picture of what's behind you too. Mm-hmm. It shows something else, a different picture.
Mm-hmm. Well, and your perspective is going to be different from someone else's perspective. The way they see something is going to be different than what you see. What they notice is going to be different. How they experience it. The ways that I was feeling during COVID were entirely different from the ways a lot of people were feeling during COVID, because I had suffered a loss, but I didn't feel like it was the same as someone becoming sick. And I couldn't speak to it in the same way that other people could. And I couldn't bring it up without all the mess that comes around when someone takes their own life and everyone's opinions about it. So I couldn't grieve with people online because I was subject to everyone's opinions about how she'd taken her life. And so my perspective of COVID was very much directed by what happened with my sister, whereas everyone else in this room probably had their own unique experience of what that time meant to them and how it impacted them and how they view the world at large because of that experience. So as photographers, I think we have a unique opportunity to try and explain that to people through visual format, and that's the way I think in pictures. So it's always been nice to have a tool that if I'm careful and intentional, I can show you what it is that's happening inside me. Yeah.
Do you have any encouragement for people who are interested in pursuing art that you'd like to share with the group?
I think we've had a tendency, especially in the digital age, to kind of farm out learning things from the internet. So people will go on YouTube and try and do some tutorials or different things. And it has a wonderful place. I use it occasionally to brush up on some things or to kind of refine some things I'm doing, see what other people are trying and doing to see if I can improve on what I know. But there's something really beautiful about the interaction between a mentor and someone who's there because they're interested in learning. Sometimes that looks like a classroom, but sometimes that looks like a friend who's eagerly engaged with you in it. Sometimes that looks like attending an event like this and networking and trying to pick someone's brain. And so I love to remind people of the importance of connection and the importance of community so that people can really benefit from the knowledge and experience of other people. I know that there's not a whole lot of place in photography anymore for darkrooms, but because I have that experience, I know very well the technical aspect of photography that sometimes gets glossed over, and people are like, oh, put this filter on and put that filter on, not understanding the science behind it. And I don't fault them for that because I learned in an academic setting, so I had the benefit of that. But I like to share that when I can because it's this light bulb moment for people when they figure out how to fit the pieces together, that sometimes they just need to have a conversation because there's just so much information. Sometimes it's hard to know, like, where do I start? What do I need to know? What is important for me? And sometimes just having a conversation, you're able to get that in real time. They're able to whittle down, oh, well, if you try doing this, and let's sit down and try this together. And hey, let's go out and have a drive and see what we can find. And they don't have to be an expert to do that. You could have someone who's great with hikes and knows the trails and can take you somewhere you haven't been before. I think that there's lots of opportunity, but we have to be open to having more conversations and more community. And it's important to not forget how interconnected we are and how important that can be in what we do as artists. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.